Okay, good evening, everyone. And thank you again for coming out tonight for what I'm hoping would be a very enlightening conversation around parole and probation and how those two systems impact the lives of the people who are actually experiencing them. And tonight we have some great speakers. I'm going to have them introduce themselves. We're going to start to my right with Mr. Watts, Dr. Watts.
Dr. John Watts. Currently, I am assistant professor, program director at the University of St. Joseph. We have a really cool criminal justice program. It's the only criminal justice program in Connecticut that is criminal justice and restorative justice. So I'm really proud to be a part of that program, to lead that program for the last 3 years. We saw tremendous growth. I'm a professor. I love teaching. Prior to me becoming a professor, I was a probation officer for 20 years. I started in New London, Connecticut, and then eventually I moved down to the New Haven area, and then I retired as a supervisor. During my time as a probation officer and supervisor, I worked a lot of different specialization units. I'm sure we'll get into that today. And most recently, towards the end of my career, I supervised the gun unit, so I'm sure you heard about, the gun unit. We'll get to that. So they have a gun unit where they supervise, high-risk gun offenders, and they work, very close with the police department. And then I also supervise sex offender unit. So I think today I don't represent the judicial branch or probation department. I'm speaking solely as an academic, just to educate people, because there's so much information about parole, probation that people don't know about. It is a trap door at times. It could be a complex system. So my job is just to educate, advocate, and just kind of fill in that information, because most people, the general public, really don't know how these systems work. So that's my role today.
Thank you very much. And for those who don't know me, I love to bring humor into every conversation. So I didn't mean anything for anybody who don't know. That was just humor. Okay, next we're going to have the chairwoman of parole.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for having me today. My name is Jennifer Medina Zaccanini. I'm the chairperson for the Board of Pardons and Paroles. I've been the chair for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was a board member for 15 years. Before my time with the board, I worked with the Department of Children and Families as a social worker, an investigator, ultimately a supervisor. And prior to that, I worked in alternative incarceration. I have a bachelor's degree from Central Connecticut State University and a master's degree from the University of New Haven. I'm here to provide some education and answer some questions if there are any. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex. I'm a master's level social work student in my last semester. I am also a formerly incarcerated advocate. I spent about 5 years inside here in Connecticut at York Correctional. So I'm here really to, be a voice for other formerly incarcerated people or people living on probation and parole.
And one of the reasons I think it was very important to have Alex on the panel is because as we talk about parole and probation and how the system worked, I think, I know it's most important to hear from people who have actually lived that experience. And so I want to definitely spend some time talking about what that experience has been for you. And you say you experienced both systems.
Yep, I've been on parole first and then probation for the last 9 years. I was on an ankle monitor as well when I was on parole.
Did you say you was on probation for 9 years?
Yeah, I'm still on. I get off in October.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, definitely got to hear about that. I always think about probation like 2 or 3 years. Oh, okay. So we can get started with our chair. Hopefully we can get this working right. And our chair of parole will be doing a presentation. And so I'm going to ask people to be patient. You have some burning question that you feel like you just have to say something before it comes to Q&A. Write those questions down on a piece of paper. So whatever you're feeling, put it on paper until Q&A comes up. Thank you.
Thank you. And I brought with me, I'll introduce them now, the board's supervising psychologist, Dr. Walker, and our legislative and administrative advisor, Attorney Colin Milne.
All right.
So I may defer to them for some things here today. Okay, so we put together a PowerPoint. Here we go. The mission of the board. Some of this, I'm sorry if it's boring, but I want to get through some of the basics. The mission of the Board of Pardons and Paroles is to facilitate the successful reintegration of suitable offenders into the community. The vision of the Board of Pardons and Paroles is reduced recidivism, increased investment in crime prevention, fewer victims, less violent, safer communities, and accurate measurement of all of the above. The Board of Pardons and Paroles believes public safety is best achieved if criminal justice policy takes both punishment and rehabilitation into account. We believe in victims' rights, that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, in the potential for positive change, in utilization of evidence-based practices in decision-making, in maximizing resources, and in community safety achieved through multi-agency collaboration. Okay, so we have at the Board of Pardons and Paroles approximately 65 professionals, includes myself. There are 9 additional full-time board members at this time. I have an executive director, the legislative and administrative advisor who's here today, supervising psychologist, Dr. Walker, parole supervisors, there are 5 of them currently, institutional parole officers who are housed in all of the prisons throughout the state, hearing examiners who do the revocation and rescission hearings. We have a paralegal, 2 research analysts, record specialists, and secretaries and other office assistants. The Office of Victim Services, that's from the judicial branch. They offer advocacy programs and services to help crime victims and survivors with emotional, financial, and many other impacts of crime, and to provide support through the criminal justice process. A victim services advocate contacts appropriate victims for docketed parole cases, explaining the process and assisting each victim to provide an impact statement to the board. So we have 3 victim advocates in our office. They're housed there, but they actually work for judicial. Okay, our core agency functions are clemency, which includes pardons, commutations of sentences, certificates of employability, and early discharge, so parole and special parole can be terminated early. And then we have parole, which includes the release, rescission of parole, setting conditions for parole, revocations, and interstate transfers. Okay, these are the different parole release mechanisms. There's discretionary parole, which is a standard. Someone's incarcerated and has a hearing at either 50% for nonviolent offenses or 85%. There's special parole, which is part of a sentence imposed by the courts, and that follows your sentence. There's compassionate or medical parole, which can be applied for if someone is debilitated or incapacitated, usually sick or elderly. And Public Acts 1584 and 23169 are juvenile reconsideration hearings. So those are, 1584 is a hearing for a serious crime committed prior to the age of 18, and 23169, that act is for crimes committed under the age of 21. And this is basically the continuum of supervision. You go from incarceration to possibly community release through DOC, discretionary parole, there's special parole, and probation follows parole. Okay, parole eligibility versus suitability. Eligibility is by statute. For sentences greater than 2 years, you'd be eligible for parole. Prior to under 2 years is TS through DOC. You must serve 50% of your sentence or 85% if it's a violent offense by statute. And you cannot be incarcerated for an excluded offense such as murder, aggravated sexual assault. Those are set by statute. Suitability factors. So in order for the board members to determine suitability, we look at criminal history, the risk to reoffend, we want it to be lower, any impact to the victim, completion of appropriate programs while incarcerated, demonstration of offender change, and an adequate release plan upon release. Okay, board preparation for a parole hearing. This is what we do prior to parole hearing. We obtain the required documentation. Some of that is set by statute and the rest by policy. A parole officer at the prison will interview, contact a sponsor if there is a sponsor, and then they write a detailed summary for the board members to look at. The case is certified by a parole supervisor. It's assigned to a docket, and then it's studied by the board members. So we get a file in advance of a hearing, and we review the entire file. Then there's a parole hearing and a disposition, our decision. Okay, I'm going to turn the structured decision-making, evidence-based decisions over to Dr. Walker.
Thank you. So when a board member begins to look at a file, it's really important that the board member be able to set aside biases, preconceptions about an individual or any aspect of their life, or frankly of their offense. And so the Connecticut Board of Pardons and Paroles and boards of pardons and paroles across the country, in Canada and in the UK, have adopted the use of what is called the structured decision-making framework. Sorry. The SDMF for parole release was developed out of Carleton University in Canada. There has been decades of research looking at what are the factors that relate to an increased risk of recidivism, and what are the factors that are not related to recidivism. If we did a poll of everybody sitting, I'm okay. If we did a poll of everybody sitting in this room, even though you have come because you have a shared interest, my guess is that there would be some discrepancies between you, different ideas about what would increase risk for somebody to commit an additional crime, or what would be a protective factor, what would be something that might assist an individual to remain crime-free. So the structured decision-making framework provides guidance to boards. It's how we think about cases, we think about individuals, we think about, first of all, their statistical risk. So everybody who goes into a facility, and you all know this, they get assessed. They get assessed by a case manager, they get assessed by addiction services, that they get, different departments within DOC will do assessments to help them to determine what programming an individual should participate in while they're incarcerated, and that's developed then into what's called the Offender Accountability Plan, the OAP. So the statistical risk is done using a variety of instruments, and it depends on what the individual's crime is, which instruments are used. The risk may be low, moderate, high, very high. It's a range. And so it always begins, we always begin with that. Somebody who has come into the facility for the first time may have no criminal history and may have a very low risk for recidivism. So we're going to look at statistical risk. We're going to look at their history. Have they committed other offenses? Have they been convicted of other offenses? Have they been released to community supervision before, whether it's parole or probation or both? And if they have been in the community on supervision, how did they do? Were they able to utilize those resources in a way that was helpful to them, or did they not find that helpful? And did they struggle with their officer? Ability to control behavior has to do with factors that were involved in their offense. Was it a domestic violence offense? Were they jealous? Were they controlling? Were they assaultive? Were they involved with peers who led them astray. There are a variety, as you can imagine, of factors that relate to ability to control behavior in their instant offense, in the crime that brought them to prison. Institutional behavior, discourse. Were they able to follow the rules in the Department of Corrections, or did they struggle with those rules? Did they start off rough, kind of learning how to navigate the strictness of the facility, the difficulty of other individuals who are housed with them, et cetera, and then figure it out and find a way, find a path so that they were able to conduct themselves in a pro-social way in a difficult place? Responsivity has to do with programming. Were they able to participate in, to complete the programming that is related to their individual risk to reoffend? So for instance, if an individual came in with some serious assault convictions, did they participate in an anger management program or domestic violence if there was intimate partner violence? Did they participate in sex offender treatment if they're being incarcerated because of a sexual offense? Offender change just has to do with how does the individual reflect and talk about how they feel they are different today than they were when they committed their crime, and to be able to talk about what led them to that change. The board does not assume that the programming alone changes somebody. Their interactions with other individuals, with their cellmate, other people on the unit, their interactions with DOC staff, with teachers if they're participating in education programs, with their families. If they talk to their mom or their sister or their dad on a regular basis, have those conversations helped them to change in some meaningful way? And the last thing is release plan. Do they have a really good, strong plan for housing, for employment, for pro-social supports? What have they been thinking about in terms of when I leave those doors and go back into the community, what is going to be there for me to help me to adjust in a positive way, to get my life going in a direction that doesn't bring me back into the facility? These others that are in white are policy related. The board looks at if it was a particularly heinous crime, something like the Cheshire murders. They look at victim considerations, if the individuals, if victims related to an individual are concerned for their safety. And then there are statutory considerations that just have to do with the seriousness of the crime, whether they have to serve 85%, whether they were there for, if they committed their crime as a teenager, et cetera. So these are the factors that are related to the structured decision-making framework that help board members to review and to consider each individual. Some of the information board members get when they are reading a file, but a lot of the information they get when they're interviewing the individual for their parole hearing. This is how they think about the case. In the end, board members, this is not a tally sheet. There's no scoring with this. Board members make their decision using these factors as a guide.
You want to do the pardons one? Let's talk about pardons.
Thank you, everybody. And I've been in this position for just a little bit over about a month now, so they're going to give me one slide, so that's good. I don't want to change board policy too drastically. That would not be good. So pardons, what I kind of wanted to give a quick disclaimer, as I am an attorney and for the wet blanket portion here, is anything I say is not legal advice. If you have any concerns or questions about someone's pardon or going through that process, I would ask you to discuss that with an attorney. They would be better to give you individualized legal advice for those situations. So pardons are our process. These are our grants of clemency that we give through the state. These are separate from really any sort of the habeas kind of proceedings that we see when people are challenging wrongful convictions. This is really the act of mercy or grants of clemency by the state to allow people to move on from their criminal record. This is one facet of that. The other that you may know of, that we're not exactly involved with, is the clean slate erasures. Clean slate is now getting more and more convictions are being erased through that process. So hopefully many people will be getting those cleared off the record shortly. Pardons. The statutory eligibility are that 3 years have elapsed since disposition of the most recent misdemeanor conviction. 5 years must have elapsed before of the most recent felony conviction. All court order supervision has been completed, and there can be no pending charges or open cases in any jurisdiction. So that means not only in Connecticut, but in out of state as well. Now, when granting a pardon, the panel looks at suitability. That includes the nature and seriousness of a crime, impact on any victims, length of time remaining crime-free, stability in community, and efforts to become a productive member of the community. If you go on our website, you can view hearings, and you can view people apply for pardons, and it's a very interesting way to look at how people are reacting and how pardons are granted. We're really looking for that change, and as we see in the offenders and the parole, but really that change and that becoming that positive member of the community and in our society. You can apply for pardons at through the ePardon portal, ct.gov.
All right, thank you both. Okay, I brought some statistics with me. In 2024, there were 1,023 parole hearings, average of 85.3 hearings per month. And in 2024, the grant rate was just over 50%. In 2024, 1,165 pardons were granted. Thank you.
Thank you again. So I'll give you a brief overview about probation system. So let me start for most people, the general public. We want to know the difference between parole and probation. So I'll start with there. I'll give a definition. Oftentimes people don't understand what's the difference. So parole, let's start with probation. So probation is a conditional release of a individual that was convicted of a crime with a suspended sentence, but they're out in the community. So they never serve any correctional time. And that individual that they would meet with would be a probation officer. Whereas parole is a convicted individual that was sentenced, but they're serving physical time in a facility, but they're released early under the supervision of a parole officer. So you got two different entities, right? Probation individuals that were convicted of a crime, have a suspended sentence, meaning that sentence is still hanging over their head. Now, most people on probation with a suspended sentence, they get through the probation successfully, so you don't really hear about the jail time. A lot of times when people on probation go to jail, it has to be through some type of violation of probation, right? But majority of individuals across the United States, here in Connecticut, abroad, throughout the other states, they have a suspended sentence, but they're meeting with a probation officer in the community. And oftentimes they don't even see jail. They don't see the inside of a jail, right? Parole, they've been convicted, been in jail, but they're released early to their parole. Yes, we're going to let grandma, right? Yes. Great grandma. Okay. I get it. That's okay. So again, to give you kind of an overview about probation. So similar to the parole presentation, when a person first gets sentenced on probation, they meet with an intake probation officer. We use risk assessments, very similar to what they talked about on the parole side. But one of the things I just picked up in the presentation, a lot of the risk assessments that we use to determine people risk level, either in parole or probation, were originated in Canada. So we do a lot of our supervision that we use here in the United States is predicated on, research in Canada. But we all know, folks, life in Canada and life in the United States are totally different. So that was always been one of my arguments. We rely so much on a lot of these best practices, from Canada, but the life in Canada is totally different than here in the United States. So it's always been my talking point that I'm like, but we rely so much on what goes on in Canada, but their lives are so many different. But across the board, Connecticut and the United States, we rely on those best practices, So that's one thing. And what I've, in my research, since retiring, I've also looked at the risk assessment. How do we use the risk assessment? How do we determine the level of supervision? And oftentimes, my critique is subjective. It's whoever the officer that's doing that risk assessment, they're going to determine the level of supervision based on their worldview, right? So, for example, there's a question in a risk assessment about neighborhood, right? Well, if you grew up in New Haven, I'm not going to score against that person because not every neighborhood in New Haven is bad, but somebody that's not from New Haven may assume through their worldview that, well, they grew up in New Haven, so everything is bad, so we're going to score them. So I think that's the other part, that issues that I've been having. We use this as a risk assessment, but it's subjective to the officer, and so that's just my soapbox about probation. But the other thing too, once the person is determined their risk level, and then they'll determine how often we see that person. If you're a high, we see you twice a month. If you're a medium, we see you once a month. And then we have administrative probation systems, where we have an administrative unit where that person just checks in. There's a 1-800 number, any changes, address, things of that nature. As I kind of alluded to earlier, within probation, there's a lot of specialized units. That's one of the things about probation here in Connecticut. We have a lot of specialized units, and it makes sense to have a specialized unit, to have an officer that is trained to deal with a certain population. Because what's happening, we're seeing all different types of populations come into the criminal justice system, and it makes sense to specialize experience. So we have sex offender unit. We have, I mentioned gun unit earlier for high-risk gun offenders. We have mental health unit. We have the woman trauma unit. So the good thing here in Connecticut is we specialize the supervision experience, and that is a best practice approach. Other things about probation, like I said, I did it for 20 years. I've enjoyed probation. I didn't always agree with how probation was administered, but I felt it was important to still treat that individual across the desk, with decency and respect. So despite some of the systems that I didn't agree with, but how I can treat that person, that's that individual justice that I try to, impart on anybody that I supervise. But more importantly, now that I teach at an academic institution, I teach students that same thing. You can't control the large system, but what you can control is how you treat that individual. And remember, individuals in the criminal justice system, they are so sensitive to injustice. They know what injustice feels like, it smells like, they can feel it. So I think any justice that we can give, within the framework of a probation or parole, that goes a lot to that individual. And a lot of it is just treating them with respect and decency. That's it, and that's basically it. So I try to, subscribe to that throughout my career. I always treated people with decency. I never treated them based on their offense or because that was a moment in time. They made a mistake, and there's circumstances that led them to their involvement in criminal justice system, but we don't throw away and discharge people. We try to teach and try to make them better, citizens, and understand that, their situations that they come from is unique, but, it doesn't mean that we use a system to beat them down even further. Again, folks, I don't represent probation today. I don't speak on behalf of the probation system, but I'm here to really educate. There's a lot of information. I spent my entire career educating parents and families, because they don't know what's going on. Their loved one is in the probation system. They have no clue. And it's almost like they're doing time with their loved one. So I think it's important that we do a better job educating individuals first that are in the system, but also secondly, the family members, because they suffer as well. So I did that throughout my career. I spent time talking to grandmothers and the mother and explaining to them because it's so complex. And then also too, folks, it could be a trap door. It could be a trap door. So when you think about parole, probation, yes, it is less, it's a economic alternative to incarcerating individuals. I think a report just came out to incarcerate an individual in Connecticut is like $124,000 a year, where parole, probation is less than that. So what happened is oftentimes people think, wow, parole, probation is lesser, but oftentimes it can be a longer sentence. It could be that longer sentence, because if you get violated and then your time gets stopped, and then you got to go back and do that time. So you can start out with 3 to 5 years, but if you have multiple violations, that can turn into a 10-year sentence. So just being honest and talking to people, like, again, oftentimes that's the shiny object, but it can also be detrimental in a longer sentence to individuals and their families. So again, I'm here to answer questions, and I hope that I've kind of, gave you a kind of a crash course on what probation is, what it entails, jurisdictionally. Again, very different here in Connecticut. Connecticut, it falls under judicial branch, but in other states, it might fall under the Department of Corrections. So we run probation here unique. It's only like 4 other states that have a statewide probation system that falls under judicial branch. It doesn't fall under the executive branch. So, but yeah, so if anyone has questions, I'll be happy, and I hope I can shed light on some more information.
Well, thank you very much for that. I know I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure there's plenty out there. So before we get to your questions, I want to talk to Alex just to speak about, you've been on probation, you've been on parole. What is that like? What is it like? Because many times what I hear, and I'm going to show a short film that says that sometimes being on probation and parole, they'd rather stay in prison. And so that's why I want to know, what is that like that would make someone feel that I wish I had just stayed in prison rather than come out on parole and probation?
Yeah, I think that, I know for myself too, looking back, if I had known then what I know now, I would have taken that extra 1.5 years than, 7 years of probation, or, it's very difficult to make it off of probation without a violation. I have this statistic, I think it's like something like 50% of people have had at least one violation, if not more. But if you don't have a ton of support, it's impossible, right? Like, it's impossible. You need to have housing, a job, and they can show up at your job. There's so many, issues that make it very, very difficult. And it's a new set of rules too, right? Like when we're incarcerated, especially for, a significant amount of time, we're used to the rules inside, and then you come home and you're thinking that you're free, but you've just been given a second sentence.
I'm just curious, when you said that you were on probation, that you were on probation for 9 years, was it? How does that happen? I mean, are you sentenced to 9 years of probation?
So I'm sentenced to 7 originally. I have a 15-year sentence with suspended time. And suspended time means that you have time hanging over your head. So if you were to violate probation or parole, you're expected to go back to prison for those 15 years or whatever, the amount of time hanging. And that is a lot of people's experiences, which makes it that much more difficult, knowing that you could be incarcerated for an even longer amount of time for something as silly as a technical violation or 2 technical violations. Yeah.
And what do you consider a technical violation? I know it's something that's not a crime.
Right.
But
So
what can those technical violations be?
So technical violations are, non-criminal violations, missing curfew, missing an appointment with probation because of childcare, your probation officer is running late, but you also have work, so you choose to leave. That's a violation there. You can't use the rest. There's so many ways to violate, right? I mean, a dirty urine for people struggling with substance use disorder, right? We don't need punishment, we need support. And there's just countless ways. You could leave the state, not even thinking about it. Want to go see the Christmas tree in New York City or something. You get pulled over. That's I'm going back to jail for that. Like, there's no, there's just no question. Just because I forgot to ask. Yep, your restitution. There's just so many stipulations. God forbid you have restitution to pay back and you fall behind because you're not working. There's exclusions on who we can hang out with, who we can work around. It's wild.
Wow, I can see why people would rather just stay in prison. Wow. And who comes up with all these rules? Is this out of Canada?
No, if I may, thank you, in explaining technical violations. So a lot of the rules are created by the probation department. So basically they have standard conditions, right? Do not leave the state, do not get arrested, things of that nature. And a lot of those standard conditions also can be technical violations. If you miss an appointment, yes, do the probation officer get you on the first time, but maybe second or third time? But knowing that that person has childcare issues, again, it goes back to the discretion of the officer, right? Technical violations, it gives officers a lot of latitude, right? And I think one of the things, and I was thinking about it before I came, with probation, people have to understand where they're coming from. So if they don't have a driver's license, yeah, it may result in them showing up late or maybe having transportation issues. But the probation officer knows that, So again, I just think that we have to, there's a lot of discretion in that, Yes, if you get an arrest, that is one of the conditions. Probation can violate your probation, but there are other things that are at play. And to your point, the probation officer has a lot of discretion, but the only other person between that probation officer and a violation is the supervisor. And if the supervisor's on board, you're done. And usually the supervisors we want people to push back. Hey, let's look at the situation before. Like when I was a supervisor, when an officer would come to me, I was like, let's look at the big picture. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's always a collateral consequence if we violate, but can we use it as a teachable moment? But then not every supervisor likes that or comes from that framework. So if the supervisors say, oh, let's go, then that's the only block or only apprehension that you have between that and going back to jail. It's the supervisor. So we have to start looking at our supervisor. Who are we promoting? And do they have a more broader understanding of people, everyday struggles, things of that nature? Because they're the only level of defense is that one supervisor. After that, case goes. And if supervisors sign off on it, it's gone. And the prosecutors and the judges, they all go with the probation. Yeah.
And not to mention the bond that comes when you violate probation, even for a technical, violation. $20,000 bonds, $50,000 bonds for a technical violation of probation. So you have to bond out on these violations that end up getting dropped, honestly. There's no charges that come from it in court. It could, mine was from domestic violence, so they dropped it. I was the protected person, but I still had police contact. So it's a challenging system.
It's crazy. I'm wondering, is parole the same? Is it that easy to be revoked on parole?
I would say parole is more challenging. Parole, you typically have an ankle monitor, a GPS monitor on. They also carry weapons as parole officers. I found it more strict on parole. There was more house visits, and there was a stricter curfew. Just other more rules. There were just more rules on parole, and there's also nuances with parole of special parole and all sorts of different things.
Jennifer, tell me about special parole. Because that's something I've heard a lot of controversy around.
Special parole is a supervision that's imposed by the courts as part of their sentence. So very similar to probation. Someone can be given a sentence with probation to follow it as well. But special parole is intended to be used in the supervision of more violent offenses.
Okay, I've been hearing a lot of sounds out there, so I know there's a lot of questions. I'm going to ask that whoever has a question to come up front, because I want to make sure that the person who's doing the filming can hear you. You're on a mic, so please come up front with your questions. And what does the time look like? Sorry. 8 o'clock, okay. So let's try to keep the questions brief.
I'm not sure if this is more of a
Comments.
question as it is. Dr. Watts, I wish I lived in the world of your probation because your probation doesn't exist for us. So I have been off probation since 2023, even when I used to see the parole officer. Here's the thing. Ask anybody in this room who's been on parole or probation. The minute you see the uniform, even if you're not even on supervision, your gut falls into your rear. You break out into a sweat. Hypervigilance that never goes away. You're not even on supervision. And that PTSD never goes away. When we talk about technical violations, we talk about economic impossibilities, right? You're trying to find a job, trying to do all these things, even if you do the right thing. So when you talk about that Disneyland variation of probation you talked about, mine was the complete opposite. My probation officer, technical violation. Failure to comply. 2 years to pay back restitution. But I had been fighting since I had been on parole to get it elongated. But I got violated regardless of that. So, technical violation, extra time. That hypervigilance, that PTSD, never goes away, ever. Mass incarceration stays with you in ways that there are people in this room. It's different for all of us, but the ticks are all the same. I would love, Doctor, I saw you point out empirical data. That model, that risk assessment, I heard 4 people behind me who all did time. That risk assessment, none of us went through that when we were going at all. So I would love for the reality of that, for anyone please to tell me where does that exist? Because I've gone before the Board of Pardons and Parole. That does not exist for us. So I need to understand where.
Yeah. Thank you. You want to pass the mic? Thank you very much. I'm really learning a lot. To tell the truth, I'm really sick sitting here hearing this because I don't see how anybody ever gets free.
Before I pass it, I had wrote that same exact thing down on the statistical risk slide, that assessments are not done for us when we're incarcerated. There is no doctor coming to see us or follow-ups being done. So I'm not sure how much they know us to have any idea what kind of risk we pose. And for that to be where you guys start is mind-blowing, because we don't follow up with any of the same care inside. I also just want to bring up programming. There's a lot of times that when you're inside, we don't have access to the program that you guys are asking us to do for a variety of reasons. We might not have enough time. We might have too much time. We might not be a low enough safety risk. So, and I also find that for a lot of us that have violent crimes, our safety level risk never goes down. So I continue to be a level 5 even after I've been home for almost 10 years now, because of my crime that I committed when I was 19 years old. And just one last thing, I have to bring 2 things up before I pass the mic. I'm so sorry. I just want to let everybody know that the legislative session is starting February 4th. And Cultivating Justice, Diana over here, is they're working on a probation and parole reform bill this session, looking at the harmful impacts and access to SNAP benefits for people on probation and parole. So there's some flyers behind her over there if anybody's interested. And just lastly, I want to really just take a second to mention language here. It really matters how we talk about people. And using the words like inmate, felon, sex offender, or offender is harmful. It's harmful to us, it's harmful to our families, and it's harmful to our communities. We really prefer person-first language, which would be a person who's incarcerated, a person on parole, a person on probation, a person convicted of XYZ crime. One Standard of Justice, and Cindy's back there, as well as Stop Solitary and myself, will be working on a campaign around language, specifically in the state statute. So we hope to partner with everybody in this room and continue to work with everybody on that. That's it. Thank you guys so much.
And I just want to say, just to piggyback on that, language has always been important to me. When I started meeting with the correctional administrators, I always started out with, could we please use incarcerated person? And I remind people that we used to call correctional officers guards, but to bring their humanity into their position, we changed it to correctional officer. And I think incarcerated people need that same kind of demand, that we should say they are incarcerated people, someone who's committed a crime, whatever. Because if you could say correctional officer, then you can say incarcerated person. Because I actually figured that out. We went from guard, which was 1 syllable, to correctional officer, which is, I think it was 7 syllables. So we can go from inmate to incarcerated person, which is only 6 syllables. Just give them their dignity. That's all we ask. Yes, 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 yes.
Well, I say returning citizen. So, one of the things I wanted to know when I was on probation, I did get rearrested, and they gave me back all my time. And and what I got arrested for was minute, and I had like 6 months. They gave me 6 months for that, but because probation gave me back all 6 of my years, I ended up with 6 years and 6 months. So why do, or what criteria my question is, do you still do that when you get violated on probation? Give a citizen back all their time, even though I was 5 months and 32 days away from my 6 years. They gave me back every last year.
I'm sorry to hear that. The judge, oftentimes when there's a violation, the judge look at how much time you've already served on probation, how much time you had suspended left, and they kind of make that decision. But once that probation is already violated, it's really removed from the probation officer, and the judge kind of makes that determination. So my question to you is, even at that time, did you have any legal support, someone that can advocate for you, or it was just kind of you went to court and they just said, here's your sentence?
No, I had legal.
Okay.
They violated me.
Yep.
He gave me a cash bond of $5,000.
Right.
I waited to go to Niantic because I didn't want to bond
Right.
out in front of his face because I was working.
Yep.
And then at the end of the case, when they gave me the 6 months, he gave me the 6 years back.
Wow.
So I ended up
Wow.
going to jail, and I got caught in the Pettit case and ended up spending an additional year in jail.
Wow. I'm sorry
But-
to hear that.
I just want to remind you, as you're speaking, please please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Talking to the mic, because I want to be able to hear this later, or let other people hear it, and then they'll say, well, what was that lady saying? I didn't hear her. You have to talk into the
I
mic,
apologize.
please.
The other thing was for me, in my era, because I've been, out of the system for 16 years. In my era, people can just call and file a complaint, and you guys, probation and parole, will come and get us. And it was a one-sided story. They didn't want to hear it. I could call you. You're on probation. I can call right now and say, oh, she bumped into me into the store, and that's an automatic violation. And they will come and get you, no questions asked, no matter where you are. And you have to go get arrested. You got to fight it out in court only to find out the person might have lied. Maybe it's the ex-boyfriend can't stand you no more. The ex-girlfriend can't stand that you're with someone else. So again, is there any type of change for that now where you listen to a caller and you go and interview and you find out before you get arrested?
So, and if I may, that's a really good point. Now, I think every officer has to do their diligence to investigate it. You know, go a little bit further. Yes, we get calls all the time because, right, people, oh, she's on probation, I'm going to call the PO, boyfriend, girlfriend. That happens all the time. But we can't react to every call. We can document, but we can't react to every call. There are certain cases where there's, you know, victim sensitive situations, but I think the probation officer has to do their due diligence, look, investigate it, and understand that sometimes people are against individuals that's been on probation and they just want to see them get in trouble, and they know that you're the only person that can do that. So I'm sorry that happened to you, but I'm hoping that most probation officers have the common sense to go beyond that. And I've seen it, and I'm not going to sit here and say that every probation officer is going to do that, but I've seen where we've seen it. We get enough calls and we don't react on the first call, but we investigate it enough. Okay. But you want it for your benefit too, because we have to protect you as well. You know, so not just the victim, but we got to protect you as well. And maybe that can be a good talking point the next time you come in. Hey, how do we help you to avoid these individuals? So it's really about the officer. Every officer is different. Some might jump on it more than others, but we would hope that people would do the right thing and look beyond that.
Okay. Last question is for parole.
Excuse me.
Just one. This is the last question. I know. Just one more question. This is for parole. I know of several people that's in Madugo that's of age, 80 plus, and they're just there in the medical unit. Is there any chance that maybe you, in some time, take a look at that in Madugo and release these aged people that's just hanging around? I'm sorry, I'm using hanging around, but for me, it's just hanging around because they're not doing it. They're not able to work. They're just incarcerated. And I look at it as a taxpaying citizen. The older they get, the more it costs us to house them. Release them to the elderly facilities and let them go, because being in jail is not, I feel there's nothing else that jail can offer or do for them at this point.
Okay, so should I assume that they're not parole eligible?
A couple of them are, but they don't have anywhere to go.
Well, if they're parole eligible, they would come for a hearing, and we would find them a place to go if they didn't have anywhere to go. But for those who are not parole eligible for more serious crimes, maybe, we do have compassionate parole, and one of the criteria is advanced age for compassionate parole, so someone would just need to apply for them.
Thank you for your questions.
How you guys doing? As always, Ms. Fair, I appreciate the work that you do in our community, and and I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that. I appreciate you all for coming out. I think what we're doing here is an important step potentially to moving forward. So before I say anything, I'm going to preface what I'm going to say with 2 points. One, anything that I say moving forward is by no means to minimize any victim's trauma, right? There's no amount of work that can be done insofar as a person trying to heal themselves, trying to restore some justice in the spaces that they exist in, that minimizes whatever a person who has been harmed is experiencing. Two, as far as systems go, particularly probation and in my own lived experience, parole, I understand that operators within that system are oftentimes overwhelmed, right? And I think that's part of the issue, right? So now that all that being said, I'm a formerly incarcerated person. I served approximately 22 years in prison. I went in just a month after my 18th birthday, and I went before Director Zaccanini and two of her board members, and they granted me parole. November 22nd, 2024. In that short time since I've been home, I'm a full-time student at Wesleyan University. I work up at Quinnipiac University as the reentry director, right, for helping men and women who are doing higher education try to figure out what it means to reintegrate back into society. I only mention all of what I've been doing in that last year because it highlights, it indicates, it implicates all the work that I was doing in the 22 years. Now, in 2022, I went before the Commentations Board. The then director, I forget his name, pardon me, but Giles, there we go, Giles. I went before him and 2 other members, and what's interesting to me, and my question is this, and then I get back into my story that kind of makes sense. As far as your sustainability factors, given your list, how do you quantify what gets prioritized in that list? And I say that because through my own experience with then director Giles, the family, because of their trauma and whatever the relationship they have with it, they were opposed to my release. I didn't agree with them, but I understood that. I was empathetic to that. I think as far as Mr. Giles is concerned, with the kind of systemic power that he had, kind of conflated, at least this is my opinion, conflated empathy with something a bit more harmful, where he was able to make a decision based off of what the family felt, but I met all of the other requirements for the sustainable factors, right? I have a dear friend of mine who went before the Commentation Board. They told him, well, you doing so good in jail, the population is actually a benefit for you. And I'm kind of like paraphrasing. So maybe you should stay in jail. So I'm just curious about like these kinds of harmful, because you spoke about subjectivity, right? And I think that when I went before you, nothing changed from 2022 when I went before the Commentation Board, which I did get some relief, to 2024 when I went before you all and you essentially granted me release, right? Nothing changed. I was still in school. My conduct was still, my relationships with people in the community and the prison were the same. I'm just curious about how that gets navigated, because the implications of that could be dangerous, right? And only thing that changed is, in fact, that the family had spoken at my most recent hearing, and the prosecutor's logic was, well, Mr. Collins should remain in prison until he's 45 because that's when the victim died. And it called it poetic justice. That's dangerous language. Now, I appreciate that, and I'm, if I'm lending out the benefit of the doubt, that you all saw past that or was able to look beyond that and say, you know what, not to minimize the victim's family, but Mr. Collins has done, and we feel such a way. And so I circle back to my question about how do you quantify the things on your list for people given that list?
Thank you for your question. So I can't speak for the previous administration or other board members. I can tell you that I go into a hearing, especially when there's a loss of life, knowing or expecting the victim's family to oppose parole, right? I mean, very understandably, I think most of us would probably feel that way. If we lost someone, we would oppose. That's just one factor, so given that I already know that will exist, the opposition will exist, of course that plays a role. Can I give you a number? No. I mean, I think every board member is different. So I can't quantify what each category, what percentage matters, but I can say your case was extraordinary, right? I mean, you had very clearly done the work. You had changed yourself. You were not the same person. Cases like yours make it pretty easy for someone like me to make a decision. Not every case is like that. So we really do look at all of the factors, break them down, and try to use our discretion and make the best decision that we can. But I can't speak for others. I'm sorry. I hope you understand. But you're right. If someone fulfills most of the things that we're looking at, it would seem logical that that we would grant parole. And I can't speak to what the victim said in your case and how impactful that might have been. Every case is different, but for myself, I try to balance everything. As you said, oftentimes the state's attorney's office will come and oppose, and sometimes they have a good argument, you know. But there are many, many, many times that we grant anyway, regardless. In your case is a good example of that. I wish I had a better answer. There's no formula.
Yeah. Thank you. Can you go to the next person? One thing I wanted to say while we're on this subject real quick, and I'm going to ask people to be brief because you have a line behind you. But I was looking at the parole, the rate of parole being granted, and I looked at from 2022, I think I went back to 2025. And what I found is since 2022, the rate of parole being granted has actually decreased. It was like over 64% before 2022, and in these last couple of years has been just over 50%. So I don't know what's going on, but maybe you can speak to that at some point. But I want to let these people get their question in, and we can go back to that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. My name is Diana Martinez. I'm the executive director of Chicks-Ahoy Farm, and we run our organizing arm, Cultivating Justice, is working on probation parole reform around a couple measures. And I wanted to talk a little bit about language, because we talked about it a little bit, right, with like saying like people first language. But there's also, you all in your presentation use some words like scientific based evidence, right? But then you described this rubric and then you called it guidance. Guidance is not a rubric. Guidance is optional. And so I'm, have some questions around how you take a evidence-based scientific approach and then put it aside and say, well, it's up to the discretion of the officers if they want to use that evidence-based scientific approach in their decision-making, which doesn't seem like there's any purpose then for the evidence-based scientific approach, right? If you're just going to let people do what they want to do either way. And also if there's no decision-making factors for how someone gets on the board, right? That's based on a scientific-based rubric. We also talked about, the possibility, or you used some words around struggle. Did this person, was this person released before? Did they struggle with their officer? That seems like a very one-sided view of looking at a dyad with an officer that is also very power-based, has a lot of power-based structure to it. A person doesn't struggle with an officer because the officer's in control and the person is at their behest. And so I wonder if you have a rubric for how you're deciding whether or not people are eligible for parole or probation or any of those things. Do you have a rubric for how you measure the effectiveness of a parole officer or probation officer, their capability for bias, the scientific probability that they might be aggressive to the persons under their care, or the scientific probability that they will be effective in enacting recidivism, which is their end charge? And also, in fact, Mr. Watts talked about his charge more like case management than what actually the role of an actual probation officer is by statute, which is an investigative role, not a case management role. And however, folks are being put on probation at a rate of as of current OPM numbers, 33,669 people currently on probation. And they all been assigned a probation officer, but not one of them has left a court being assigned a case manager, being assigned a social worker, being assigned a psychologist, being assigned a family reunification specialist, the kinds of things that people actually need to support them in re-entering into community and being good returning citizens. And so I have all of these questions about the metrics that are used.
Me. I don't want to cut you off.
No, I'm not gonna. Okay, I'm all done. I'm all done.
I'm trying to be
Barbara,
as
I love
nice
you.
as I
Okay.
can. And in the meantime, could my daughter come up here and just facilitate for a moment, because I got to run to the ladies' room, and I don't want to hold people here, knowing that we're going to be ending soon. I know there's a lot of questions, and I try my best to respect them all, but I also have to respect the time
We get
and
you.
the people that are lining up behind you. Thank you.
Is anybody going to answer that though?
I know.
Okay.
It was just, I think there were like 4 or 5 questions there. So
What's your top question?
to probation and parole. So which question would you like us to answer?
I think any question around the qualifications, the metrics by which probation officers, parole officers are evaluated, the measuring of bias in their decision making, how are those things accounted for in any evidence-based scientific way?
Okay, the evidence-based practice was for board members. It wasn't for officers. So I don't know if you have, if it's different in probation. The presentation that I showed, that evidence-based model was for the board members. And not all of the criteria is based on risk. There are some non-risk related things that we consider when making a decision.
So what you're saying is that there's no effective criteria for determining who serves on the board, who serves as a parole officer, who serves as a probation officer.
Well, I can speak to the board members. They're appointed by the governor, and statutorily they have to be qualified by education and or experience.
And if I may, to be a probation officer in Connecticut, you just need a bachelor's degree. So when you get the job, you go through an academy, 6 to 8 months. The academy is partly you're learning case management, you're learning all of these different things, but then you're also managing a caseload at the same time. But to your point, we don't have a mechanism to determine bias. Right. There's nothing. And I go back to discretion, right? Officers have so much discretion, rather be anywhere in the criminal justice system, but parole, probation, they have a lot of discretion to work within. That's why it's important. We got to start looking at who we hiring and also the supervisors, because supervisors, that next line of defense, they're the only thing blocking that officer that may have those biases, but sometimes it requires the supervisor to push back. Hey, let me look at the whole entire picture. But I did that. I wasn't afraid to push back on my officers because I knew the consequences if I just went along with this violation. There's the family aspect. There's so many different things. But are we hiring the right individuals, not just having a bachelor's degree, but there's no assessment to really measure attitudes, beliefs, and orientation? That becomes problematic because that person now impose their worldview on that individual and make their lives, hell. Not a lot of research either. So if you look at some of the articles out there, they do look at the orientation and belief system, more juvenile, but not a lot in the adult side. So the other part, we don't put a lot of research out there to measure beliefs and orientation and bias. But that's important because that can really change the trajectory of somebody's life. So we don't have that. And I think there needs to be more scientific research around that. I will say, when I went for my doctorate dissertation, I didn't go to probation because they weren't going to give me the data, because what I wanted to measure is something similar to that, but they wasn't going to give me that. So I went somewhere else. But the point is, we need researchers to really start looking at bias, belief systems, things of that nature. It's very hard to measure because people can fake it in the interview. But it's a great point. We just don't have enough data to pull from.
Rahisha.
Hello. Hi, everybody. I'm Raisha. I was a board member for Stop Solitary for 3 years, a digital organizer. I'm also conservator for my brother who has schizophrenia and is on parole and was incarcerated 2 years in a row on a technical violation. He was just released last Wednesday. I have a lot to say, so time me out if you need to, but
I will.
Okay, so one of the things that didn't work in the system is going through the revocation process with him twice. It seems that there are really arbitrary things that have been developed in terms of when people are violated. I've had conversations multiple times with the mental health parole supervisor about what does it take for someone to be violated. And while I recognize that in the mental health parole system, they are a little bit more lenient than just general parole, my brother was violated when he was on the verge of a mental health crisis, and he should have been hospitalized this last time. And so I want to know, and I realize there's nobody from parole and community service, and I know the organizations are different here, but how do we have such arbitrary criteria for such a delicate situation in people's lives, right? The other problem that I notice is that there's this dichotomy between when people are on mental health parole. I talked to the mental health parole supervisor multiple times about my brother's mental health needs, even his cognition and his ability to understand his conditions, which has always been an issue. And there's been this conversation about, well, part of our job is determining whether it's mental health or whether it's behavioral, when there really is no such separation between the two. Anybody's behaviors that someone has, if they have a mental illness, those are really just symptoms, right, of their behavior. But in their mind and their training, they see this dichotomy, which puts the person in a poor place. And so I'm wondering, where does that outdated bias thinking come from? And then thirdly, what I noticed going through the revocation process with him, it was purely adversarial. At one point, I had such a good relationship with the mental health parole supervisor. We had talked multiple times. My brother was on the verge of going into a mental health housing that was a higher level care because we recognized that was what he needed to be successful. He was 13 days out from moving. And me and the mental health parole supervisor, he talked to me. He said, "You're such a great advocate. Can you talk to Demas and ask for them to hold his bed? Because I have a feeling that, he's going to get time served at the next hearing." And what ended up happening is I submitted through his attorney 65 pages of evidence that he had psychosis within 2 to 3 days of his incarceration and that this was mental health. And then they came back and they pretty much said that they wanted parole revoked. I asked him if we could agree to just something, right? He's already served 3 times and they refused. So I recognize there's something in the dynamic of parole and community services that makes them adversarial. Why does that have to exist? That we are adversarial about people's needs. When I recognize as a human being outside of this context, this person was great with me. But there was something about it that when we submitted that evidence and they were gonna look wrong, literally, that was the end. That was the end of any negotiation, coming to an agreement. They even made it seem that because he had been hospitalized before and been committed, that he was somehow taking advantage of parole because they revoked his violation before. And why is that even up to the parole officer's discernment if they get to revoke a warrant when someone is deemed incompetent? So I realize there's a lot of complexities I'm talking about here, but I just want to what can we do to erase this adversarial dynamic that really harms people? Because as many people have pointed to, he needed things that were missing from his treatment. Even substance use treatment programs are ineffective and outdated, but time and time again throughout the hearing, they're blaming my brother. So what are even the accountability structures? I see the mission statement for recidivism. How are parole officers measured on that? And do they get in trouble if someone has a lot of violations? So there's a lot of questions there, but choose which ones. Thank you.
I'll just add, I'll just speak from just my prior experience. Oftentimes, we have to violate to really shield liability, unfortunately. And it's sad. It's sad where people really need help, but then the liability thing comes up and the public safety and all that stuff comes up. And sometimes it come down from us. We don't even have a say. Sometimes it could be in a policy, it could be a supervisor, it could be administrator. And sometimes we tell them, look, the situation that this might not call for it, but sometimes it comes, because it's a very structured bureaucracy going up and they shift liability quick. And unfortunately, liability, it hurts other people because they don't want to look bad. They don't want to read about that person in the newspaper the next day. So what they'll do is hurry up and violate. So even though we don't agree with it, but sometimes it comes down from the top. So liability in any agency is big. And it's at the detriment of people that really need that help. So if that answers your question.
I think it does, yeah. And I just wanted to mention, Rahisha, I did invite community services because I know they are different from, but they declined. They said they couldn't come, and so I said, well, give me a date. I'll do it around you. And they couldn't come up with a date. So for me, this is just me personally, when you ask an agency to come and speak to the community and you don't want to speak to the community, it just kind of tells me that you're not doing your job and you don't want to have to be confronted with that. That's how I feel when people say I can't show up, but you're providing the service. Why would you not want to talk to the community? So I do want you to know I did try to offer them to come. Thank you.
Hello,
Okay.
hello. Good
Former
evening.
State Representative Robin Porter.
Thank you, Miss Barbara. Right, the matriarch of this.
I just want you to
movement.
talk into the mic.
I said thank you, Miss Barbara. I'm a little graspy. Y'all have to excuse that, but I just want to thank you for being the matriarch of this movement. I was talking to some friends earlier, and I said I was a state legislator for 10 years, 8 months, and 10 days, and I don't even think about going back. And you have been doing this work for decades. And I know the cost of doing this work. And I don't think a lot of people know the cost of doing this work. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, with your family, all that stuff. So just thank you for what you do. I don't come out often, but there's one person I come out for, and that's you. Now, to the question, a lot has already been discussed that I wanted to talk about, but I think the thing that really sticks is the question, what does the board, how does the board guard against implicit bias in decision making? I think that's a big thing, because what I do know, and if I'm not correct, please correct me, I have a big problem with special parole, right? So what does the data show with that? In urban centers, people from urban centers and high crime zip codes, are they more likely to be on special parole?
That's a good question. I don't know that I could begin to answer that. I'm not sure. That would be a question for judicial, actually, because it's sentenced by the judge.
And can I say something first of all, Robin? And I know you know this. At every level, from the police to going in the courtroom to what you're going to get charged with,
I want
to
it on the
sentences,
record.
all of that.
I don't want us to just talk
There's
about
a racial bias in all of it.
And I think it's important that these things are put on the record. Mm-hmm. We talk about them in our communities. We talk about them in these meetings and at these tables. We talk. My thing is, it needs to be on the record, right? What's the use of having the data if it's not on the record and we're not doing anything to implement what we're getting from the data? So that's on the point of, is it or is it not? And we may know that, but it's not for us to say. It's for those in power to say. It's a level of accountability that I don't feel is being met. And that's exactly why the community agency be here tonight, because we'll hold them accountable. And that's equitable. You shouldn't fear that. If you're in it for the right reasons and you're doing the job for the purpose it was designed, let me pull that back, because we know the purpose it was designed for. We say the system was broken, but it ain't broke. It's working how it was designed to work. Let's be honest.
And I do want to answer your question about implicit bias. The way we try to tackle that is by training board members. So we hold trainings monthly on different topics, and Dr. Walker is a big part of our training, and we bring people from the community in different walks of life, different organizations, different service providers, but we go through, the board members are required to go through training to try to tackle those biases. Dr. Walker, Attorney Milne, did you want to speak?
No, I just wanted to say, we just wanted to kind of make clear, and I didn't want to put the chairperson on the spot, that special parole is a judicial created. It's handed down at the time of sentencing. We can probably look and we can figure out we do have access to that data. I just want to make it clear that the decision that whether someone's placed on special parole does not rest with the board. It actually rests with the judge in the sentencing at the time.
I do understand.
I just wanted to make sure.
Implicit bias and things of that nature. And again, it always go back. It centers. So I gave Barbara and the young ladies a report that came out, and I'll share it with you too. There was a report that the judicial department did, and it was kind of a low-key report. So don't ask me how I got my name on it. But the point is, it looked at violation probation rates during COVID, like a year before COVID and a year after, right? And if you look at the report, they threw a lot of this jargon in, but when you distill it down, black males were getting violated at 1.45 rates higher than any other race. But we also know during COVID that it impacted the black community more than anybody. So to have this data and not to have a conversation, and I agree, that data should be on everybody's desk, every administrator's desk, newspaper, but that data kind of found its way. That's a conversation. We know that COVID affected disproportionately black and Latino, but then also parallel, more people were violated. So it was almost like they were violated because they lost their phone, they were couch surfing, but we knew that in real time. And that was a policy mandate. Because I recall at the time during COVID, if you lose track of somebody in 30 days, violate, it came from policy. But again, why don't we have these conversations? We know, and disproportionately, we know it affects certain groups, and we knew COVID, how it was disproportionately affecting, but it was never a conversation. And I saw it anecdotally, but now when I saw it on paper, it really crystallized. And I'm like, wow, they didn't even care about enough just to even have a conversation. Hey, this came out. This is something to be aware of, not even a conversation. So data's there, but where do they release that data? It's there.
And this is what I'm driving home, Miss Barbara. That's all. Like, we really do need to tackle the data. It needs to be in the hands of the people with the power.
Yes.
They're implementing the policies that are being put in place. And I think we also need to look at, the implicit bias training and make sure that the people that are doing the training are actually the people that are being impacted. I know there's been positions open for some very critical things around the ombuds office. The ombuds office. And there was no person of color that applied for the position. And it's not that there aren't people of color that are qualified. We're just not informed, right? They're not coming to us. They're not educating us. They say we for knowledge, we perish for the lack of knowledge, and that knowledge is power. No, it's not. It's the application of knowledge is power, but you can't apply what you don't have. So that's all I'm trying to drive home tonight. Like, a lot of great points have been made. I thank you all for being here tonight and for staying a little late with us tonight, because this is so important to our community, that you come and you educate and you make sure that people understand what it is, what that process looks like, and having people that have experienced it actually share how it has not only impacted them as an incarcerated person, but their family. Full disclosure, that's my story. My son, I went through this. So I know it's not just the policy and, the legislative side of it that I'm knowledgeable about. I also had the experience of being a mom who had a son that was incarcerated for years. So thank you again. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Safety, my dear. Hi. My name is Cindy Prisio, One Standard of Justice, and I've got 99 questions, but
we're only going to ask one, though.
I know. I'm going to try to keep it brief for you, Mama Fair.
It's 8:40, so.
Chairperson Zaccanini, I'm trying to get a handle on you showed us the chart from the organization, and I knew the members of the panels, right? There are 9 of them? 9.
And myself, right?
Oh, and you're, okay, are appointed by the governor. But everybody works sort of independently or siloed, right? They're an island. Like, I'm glad to hear about there's training, but if there's a case that was really handled poorly and people were harmed on, or just bad decision, implicit bias, whatever, what corrective measures are there? Do you direct the staff, or how does that all work?
Yeah, I mean, we have internal policies, we have training. I can't tell them what decisions to make. When you speak of a bad decision, Are you talking about errors in the case? I'm not sure what exactly you mean.
Sometimes there's misinformation cited by a member of the panel, and sometimes their bias is very blatant. And so if you have a person who identifies as a victim of violent crime or any crime, and the panel member cannot separate that, to me, does it ever happen? Do people recuse themselves from hearing a case?
People recuse themselves if there's a conflict of interest, but due to bias, no, I can't say that I've ever seen that. And I also can't think of any of the board members who would deny solely on victim input. You know, if I saw a trend where I thought there was a particular issue, then yeah, we would offer additional training, have a conversation.
I don't think it's on victim input. I get to watch maybe once or twice a month, depending on how many people we have going through. And what I see is just an individual's bias. And, you know, things started happening in 1990. We made an overcorrection because people at sexual harm were being ignored, whatever. And now the science has said we made a mistake. You know, we how do you roll that back? And so I know that Dr. Walker's on the staff, but we really need people, and I won't cite names, but people to sort of come up to speed. Yesterday, that was an old idea, 25 years ago, 20 years ago. And of course, I have a loved one who also went through the parole process. And if they use that, what did you call it, Diana? Then my son should, he should have been paroled. Anyway, I am very appreciative because of the progress that's been made. It's just that we've got to go a lot farther in baby steps, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Last question.
I'll go quick, I promise. My name is
Talking
Elle.
to the mic. Oh.
My name is Elle. I am on special parole right now. I have been on for 6 years. I have 7 years to serve. I have 1 more year left. I've been advised not to have a motor vehicle. I did have a motor vehicle. My plate was run, and my parole, and I didn't know because there was nothing wrong. So the cop ran my plate and just went on his way. But my parole officer was pinged. And she waited 5 days and then called me and said that I was violated because I didn't let her know I had police contact. I had no way of knowing that policeman ran my plate. I'm scared right now. My hands are sweating just talking about that because I have 7 years hanging over my head. And I would have went back for 7 years. No questions asked. No court date. And I said to her, how am I supposed to let you know? You waited the 5 days, but I had no way of even knowing that plate was run. And she said, not my problem. Now I got to do effing paperwork. That's what she said to me. I tried to travel. I hadn't traveled yet. I've been doing fabulous. I have a nonprofit for formerly incarcerated people to do music to help with trauma. I do all kinds of mindfulness work to help people learn coping skills that we didn't, things that will keep me from going back, and I can help other people from going back. I cannot get off parole. They asked me to get letters together of all the things that I had done. I got 35 letters from all over the world because I'm involved in an international music inquiry network also for formerly incarcerated people. None of those letters were read. None of those were read at all at my hearing. I went to my hearing online. Victim Services had all the control. Slammed within 5 seconds and said, Victim Services denied her request. Bam, that was it. Nothing was looked over. Nothing was read. Nothing was considered of my change. I called last week to travel, and the parole officer answered the phone. What'd you do? Not hello, Miss Ladon. Not how are you. What'd you do? What's your number? That's what I got. Not how have you been. Not how are things going. Not that's great that you're almost done in 1 year. She hit me with what'd you do? I'm shaking right now because I'm scared I'm talking too much, and I'm still on parole. And I live with that every day. I wake up and I'm still freaking 420-632. And you know what? The General Assembly awarded me last summer with a gorgeous award from all the work I've done, just 5 days after I was denied parole. So when is this going to change? That's what I want to know. We sit here and talk, and all I hear is blah, blah, blah. You had wonderful words to say, sir. That was fantasy. I looked around at her. I said, this is another universe that he's talking about, because not in my world. Not in my world.
And thank
We
you for
need
that.
to have some action now. Enough blah, blah. Too
Thank
much
you.
blah, blah.
Thank you. Yeah, one more person. But just know, when I have these meetings, it's about how we listen to each other and how do we change things into something better. Because we listen to them, they listen to us. They may not be aware, like I'm sick listening to what I'm hearing here. I'm really ill knowing that people are going through so much on probation and parole. I had no idea. And I'm hoping that you guys who are up here, if you didn't know, you understand the impact that decisions that are made in those agencies, how they are almost destroying people when they should be feeling free. And I'm hoping at some point that you guys take back what you hear to your agency and say, you know what, this policy that you have is really making it hard. We're supposed to be support. 'Cause isn't that true? Probation parole is supposed to be support. And what I'm hearing more like they're policing as opposed to supporting. And I'm hoping that we can actually have a conversation about how do we change that and become who we say we are. Because we say we are a lot of wonderful things, but what are we actually doing? I believe. And then as soon as she finishes, we're going to have the door prizes. I don't want people to leave. You've sat here all evening, so that's coming next.
I'm going to be quick. Before I ask my question, quick comment. Most people I know on probation or parole have gotten violated at least once. So, yeah, my dad, brother, husband, he's in prison right now. So, my brother is currently on parole in Connecticut. And, you know, I'm very passionate about cannabis legalization. I got arrested on Matt Rither's lawn May 1st, 2021, fighting for legalization. Thankfully, he dropped the charges. And right now, my brother is not allowed to smoke cannabis while on Connecticut parole, despite its legalization. And I'm wondering, why is that still something that the parole department does? I mean, disproportionately, it's impacted Black and brown communities. Just wondering what the logic is behind that, especially someone who has been fighting opiate addiction, and it's been proven to help with opiate addiction. Thank you.
I can say that's not one of the conditions that we have for parole, so I can't speak for parole and community services why. Yeah. It's not
They
one
told
of the
him he
board's
couldn't-
conditions.
They said that it was
it's
a general
not part
rule.
of parole. It's parole and community services. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, because
I don't-
I know
yeah.
parole. He's a level 1 inmate. Parole. I know probation's through CSSD, so they definitely said that it's through the Connecticut Parole Department. So
Right. So the Department of Correction, Parole, and Community Services supervises individuals in the field. I'm from the parole board, so we grant parole and set the conditions. And what I'm saying is that's not a condition that we set.
And that's why I was saying earlier, I invited them because I know they were different. They were separate, but they didn't want to show up.
Okay, never mind. So you can't answer the question.
Okay, I want everybody to get their red tickets out so we can have the door prizes. And I really want to thank everyone who came out. I know there's a lot of more questions I had after hearing what everyone had to say, but you know I can't hold you hostage. So maybe parole and probation will come back again and let us continue this conversation because I can see we got a lot more to talk about. Yeah. Oh, don't forget to take this is yours and a pen.